All right, let's go ahead and get this show on the road. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for our August edition of our SRE Leaders Panel. Today we're really excited to have a special edition where we'll be discussing testing in production. So we'll kick it off with 40 minutes of panel discussion with our amazing guests, and then we'll leave 20 minutes at the end for some open Q&A. As soon as the recording is ready, we'll also email all of you a recording of this panel so that you can share that with your teams, your family, anyone you'd like. So make sure you'll add any questions that you have into the Zoom chat so that we can answer them live during our Q&A session as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to our wonderful panel facilitator, Amy Toby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Toby, and I'm staff SRE at Blameless. I've been doing SRE for a really long time. Those of you who've been here before have heard this a few times. I'm really into the SRE community and figuring out ways we can enable reliability in all of our organizations. So with that, I would like to move on to our panelists. So today we have joining us Shelby Spees from Honeycomb and Talia Nasi from Split, and I'm going to let them introduce ourselves. So let's start with, since on the front page, Shelby's on the left, so we'll start with her. So Shelby, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Shelby. I'm a developer advocate at Honeycomb. I've been developing software and running production systems for about 5 years now, and I just really want to help people deliver more value in their business.
And I'm Talia. I'm a developer advocate at Split. And before this, I was doing testing and I was a QA engineer and automation engineer for 6 years. So I have a background in testing. I think that's why I'm so passionate about testing in production. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So to get started, I want to start with this idea of trunk-based development, right? But we're not going to talk about trunk-based development. What we're going to talk about is that as something that already exists in the world, and that I believe that most people should be doing by default. And what that does is it says that we test our code with things like unit tests and functional tests on our workstations and in our dev environments and things like that. But all the code, before we merge it to our main branch, has to be ready to go for production. So we've done that. Let's just assume that we've all have that in place, and all of our lovely attendees have that in place. So what's next, right? My role, as somebody in incident management space especially, comes a little bit later in the process. So I think, in terms of when we say go and deploy that code to production, what's the first thing? And I think we can start with Talia to quickly talk about like what, say, Split's products. So let's start with that just real quick. How they enable some things to be shipped out to the edge and into production before we have like full confidence that it's doing exactly what we expect.
Yeah, so with Split, you can use feature flags. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a feature flag is basically a piece of code that differentiates code deployment from feature release. So you can deploy code and it won't be available to your end users, only for a specific group of people that you can specify in the UI. So you can use feature flags to help you in this way. So if you're doing trunk-based development, you can deploy your code to production behind a feature flag, and then once you're ready and you've tested the code in production, then you can turn the feature flag on.
But something you said in there though is I think a lot of folks, the feature flag space has expanded a lot over the last few years, right? So I heard you say something about the ability to turn flags on for a fraction of users.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could bring that back to how that enables us to more confidently ship that code.
Yeah, so let's say I'm a developer on a team and I am working on this, let's say it's a to-do list app, just like a simple basic app, and I want to add the ability to delete items from the list. So I'm a front-end developer and the back-end developer is creating this new API to delete tasks. So my change is done and I have to wait for the back-end developer. So in order to do that, I'm going to wait. Either I can wait for the backend developer to be done, or I can push the code to production behind a feature flag, wait for the backend change to be done, have the backend developer push his code to production behind the feature flag as well. And then there I can put myself targeted inside the feature flag, which means that only I will be able to see those changes. And then I can test it with both the front end and the back end changes. And that's like it's a way to do it safely without affecting like your end users. So like if this is something where like you're waiting for other parts to be ready, or the different parts of your system are dependent on each other, and like you don't want to have those dependencies or wait for them to test.
Or even just waiting for release announcements.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's say a young developer has these tools and is in a trunk-based development system, and they put a feature flag on, they do all the right things, they deploy it to production, and they flip the flag on and go home for the weekend. And this is where I'm going to go to Shelby, who has an amazing T-shirt that I just noticed, and somebody else noticed in the chat. And so we're testing in production,
Mm-hmm.
and customer service wakes up and there's some complaints, and baby engineer needs to go look and figure out what's going on. And I think this is where we can hand off and talk a little bit about the role of observability.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important when even like whether you're using feature flags, I think feature flags are a core part of this. But also, even if you're not behind a feature flag and you just want to observe your change as it goes out, having the data to allow you to observe that change and really like see the impact of your code changes on real users, whether they're internal users and you're dogfooding a change, or you're releasing out to a subset of traffic or all of traffic, that's really important. And what the thing about like observability is it requires high quality, like high context data, and the context we talk about is the context you care about as you're writing your code. And so as you're writing your code, you think, okay, what's important for this? How am I going to know it's working in production? Similar to how we do test-driven development, or when we want to write high-quality tests, we say like, how do I know this test is effective? How do I know this code is effective? You write a failing test first, and then you write the code to pass the test. You can do something very similar where you write instrumentation and interact with your system and live in that production space, and learn from the actual behavior. And so when you get paged, or when you get some customer complaints and they're saying like, hey, there's something wrong, you can flip your feature flag back off. That's really quick way to fix it. And you can go back and look at you can look at the difference between who was behind that feature flag versus our baseline, and really understand like what was the impact there.
Yeah. Am I right in hearing that implies an integration between the feature flagging service and the observability? Like the feature flag would be passed into the events being sent to the observability system?
Yeah, absolutely. You can send that context along with all kinds of other context.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
You were going to say something, Talia?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Shelby said. She said if you release to like a subset of users or the entire user base, then you can monitor with observability. And I think that's also a really important point, is that when you do like a canary release or like a percentage rollout where you release the feature to like only a small subset of users, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with testing in production, because if something goes wrong, like would you want 1% of your users to experience this issue, or like 100%? So it's just, I think, an added layer of protection to have like a percentage rollout where like you slowly, incrementally like roll out the change, as opposed to like everyone is going to see this feature all at once in production.
Right. Yeah. So we've got these systems in place, and we're rolling code out, and let's say this time things are going fairly well. But I still have, like, say, my director of software engineering is coming and bugging me regularly about, like, just they're nervous about it. So what's next, right? We've got the ability to see how the code is behaving in production. We've got the ability to have very low latency, fine-grained control over which features are enabled in production. So what are the other layers that you all see out in the wild that help people build that confidence on top of these things? Because these things give us a lot of confidence, but there's always a little bit more we can do, right?
I mean, I think it comes down to the like DORA metrics. How quickly can you have a change go out into production? Is your lead time on the order of like weeks to months, or is it on the order of minutes to hours? If it takes, several weeks between writing code and it living in production, you lose all of that context. And so when something, inevitably like doesn't go right in thousands of changes over the year, there's going to be something that comes up, or just you even just want to see like what's the impact of the work I did, and you lose all that context. It's that much more expensive to gather all that back up in your head and really remember like what was the point of this that I was working on. And so lead time for changes rolling out is a big one, and that's where CI tooling makes a big difference. And at Honeycomb, we actually instrument our builds so that we can see like not only how long does it take for a build to run, but what part of it is slow and can that be optimized? Because we try and keep our build times under 10 minutes because we don't want people to go and start working on something else and then have to switch context back to see whether, if the build failed, or, when there's code review, like having to, like context switching is so expensive. And so that's something I feel like really passionate about.
It sure is.
Yeah.
It's a huge drain on cognitive resources.
Mm-hmm.
I like how you brought that up, and I was going to take it somewhere, but I got caught up in what you were talking about. So Vanessa asked in the chat, about folks using trunk-based development. If there are known defects in the code or it's incomplete, is it still safe to ship behind a feature flag?
Yeah, I think as long as the default rule is off, then it's safe to do it, because you're saying that like if you're in this bubble, if you're internal, or if you're part of our beta testing group, then you get to see like all the defects and you get to play with this thing and break it in production. But if you're not, then you don't get to see anything like related to this feature at all. So as long as the default is off, then it's safe to deploy.
Yeah,
there's a cognitive advantage there, I hear, which is, if we have modern software engineering is about working in teams and groups, right? And what I heard is this, I finished my component, maybe for as you mentioned before, your example, right? Like I get the UI code done, and that I feel like I'm confident that the simulator for the APIs or whatever that the UI is done.
Right.
I ship it and there's feature flag turned off. But now the backend team doesn't need to come bug me and cause another context switch or wait for me to respond and do my thing and deploys and stuff. They can simply turn it on in their environment.
Exactly.
And so there's a new level of coordination that's now captured in the technical system, as opposed to us having to walk around and talk to each other.
And what I really appreciate about this workflow is that, and it's one of the benefits of trunk-based development, is you don't have your front-end feature sitting on a feature branch for weeks at a time and falling behind your trunk. And so instead of using Git, which I love Git, I have used the username. It's hard to love. I've used the username Git Goddess. I've taught Git to juniors and seniors in different jobs. But making people manage integration at the Git level is error prone and it's complicated. And so using feature flags to manage when things roll out is a lot better. And I've been the person to have to go in and rebase and squash and manage other people's feature branches. I've rebased it. I think it was like 115 commit 6 months of work, and I broke it up into like 9 PRs or something. Like I will sit down and do that. I don't want anyone to ever have to do that. And so hopefully it never gets that bad. But merging things in, but even before you're ready to release the feature, and just having it guarded by a feature flag is just, it removes all of that cognitive load and that complexity.
So we've talked a lot about production and kind of like taking a lot of the guardrails off and letting our developers fly a little faster. But along that spectrum, I kind of glossed over, there's a series of different kinds of testing and validation we can do. And so I wanted to back up a little and just, kind of for our audience, try to bring these things back, because the Twitter threads we've had over the last couple of weeks about the subject, one of the things people brought up frequently is there were a couple of like, oh, hell no, kind of responses, right? And I think that came from a place of like, we really should have confidence before we put anything in production, right? So what are our options there pre-production that these tools help us carry through, right? So, for example, in our dev and integration environments, or even local testing. So maybe Talia, what's the role there where these tools kind of help us accelerate?
Yeah, so I think it's a recommended approach, like for unit testing or integration testing. Like something that is helpful that I recently learned about is to make like a custom feature flag abstraction, which makes it easy to mock up. So like if I'm a big fan of examples because it helps me like understand things. So if let's say like you're a developer who's experimenting with like giving people free shipping on like an e-commerce site, and now you're testing the shipping calculator. And if the feature flag is on for you, you get free shipping. And if the feature flag is off for you, then you get the existing shipping cost. So in this example, you would have 3 tests. So in the first test, you simulate the feature flag on where the shipping cost is 0. So that means like for the duration of this test, any requests asking if the feature flag is on, you say yes. And then in the second test, you simulate the feature flag off and the shipping cost is 0. And if any requests come in from the test asking if the feature flag is on, then you say no. And then in the last test, you just validate that you can go through the entire purchasing flow regardless of if the flag is on or off. And like, I think with this approach, you're being like super explicit in the test, and then the test just becomes much more like self-documenting and descriptive.
And I like how it validates, how that sets people up to validate both paths in parallel.
Yes.
Independent, and then both together.
Right.
I've seen so many incidents where, that the current path works fine, the new path works fine, but once both get into production together, they interact in strange and unusual ways.
Right. Right. And up until a few months ago, I actually just learned about this approach. And up until a few months ago, I would always recommend like getting your users and targeting, like getting your test users and targeting your test users inside of the feature flag and then using those to run. But the fragility of that, like if someone goes in and deletes a user from a certain treatment in the UI, or if someone like a senior person goes in and is like, what is this user? I've never heard of them. I'm just going to delete them. Like it just causes like so many problems because you're not the only person who can configure changes to the UI. So I like this approach a lot better because you take away that fragility.
Right. Nice.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Shelby.
Okay. Yeah, I think it comes down to just thinking about the impact of all your changes. A feature flag, like as trivial as it sounds to turn on and off feature flags, like it's still adding like a fork in the road. It's still, a different path that your code can take. And so you want to be intentional about where you're including it, why you're including, like what's the purpose of this, and then think about like how do I, like, once again, like how do I know it's going to be successful, and test for that, and like Talia said, test for the interaction between on and off.
That almost brings me back to chaos engineering, right? Where we have to have a hypothesis before we start. And if we don't, like, that's the difference between science and screwing around, right? Is a hypothesis.
Totally. And I feel like so many teams do this where they just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And there's times when you need to do that, but I think we can do a really good job of reducing how much of the time we're throwing things at the wall and being more like, what's going to be the impact of this change, and like things like that also make it easier if you know the impact of your change. You can include that in your PR, and that facilitates code review, and that facilitates like knowledge transfer in your team. You can it helps you make write better code that's more self-documenting, and write better comments on your code, and write better documentation around your code. And so like all of this stuff is it's all like interconnected. You know, being intentional helps you just build better software.
Ooh, speaking of intentional, that reminds me of something that I think we can talk about real quick. Is we have this forks in the road we're talking about, and so we get the fork in the road, and we push the new feature flag out at 0%, and then we bring it up to 1%. We do the whole process, and eventually we flip it to 100%. So at some point, there needs to be a loop back through the process to remove the dead path, right? And so could you talk a little bit about the processes that you've seen work for making sure that happens? Because I've also seen incidents where a feature flag sat forgotten for months or years, and then someday later somebody else goes, "What's this?" and they flip it, and there's an incident.
Yeah, so there's a few things. So the first thing is like just piggybacking off what Shelby said, like changes to your feature flag should be treated like changes to your code base because of their sensitivity. So like if you require 2 code reviews for pushing code to production, then you should require 2 code reviews for making any changes to your feature flags, just because you are affecting like real users. And then in terms of like what to do when you have like stale feature flags, so there's a few things. So a lot of feature flag management systems have like an alert that'll say, and you can set this up too, it'll say like, hey, this feature flag hasn't had any impressions, which means like people going in and making changes or being targeted in that flag. So it'll say, hey, like this feature flag hasn't had any impressions in the past, X amount of days. Do you want to turn it off? Do you want to delete it? What do you want to do? So in the UI, there's some configuration to set up. There's also in your like task management system, if you're using like Jira or Asana, like whenever you create the ticket to set up the flag, run the test, roll the feature out, whatever it is you're doing, you should also create a ticket to delete the flag and remove the old code. And then inside of the code, basically a feature flag is just an if-else statement, right? You're saying if you're in this bucket, do this, and if you're in this other bucket, do this other thing. So that if-else statement just needs to be reworked, and whatever version you chose to live needs to be put in, and that if-else statement needs to be taken out.
That kind of makes me think that that if-else needs to be kept as simple as possible too.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you get into like a case statement, then you're just asking for trouble down the road.
Yeah. Totally.
Totally.
Excellent.
We actually, so earlier this year, one of our engineers, Allison, wrote a blog post about using Honeycomb to remember to delete a feature flag. And I think this, it's sort of like a hygiene thing, right? Like I appreciate the idea of like when you open a ticket that involves creating a feature flag, you also open a ticket to later delete that feature flag. And thankfully, like removing a feature flag from code involves code review, and so there's that sort of knowledge transfer and context sharing. Thank you for sharing that. But being able to like so having that step forces you to be like, okay, what's the impact of this? And then you can go, and if you're using observability tools, you can see like, is there anyone who's still behind this feature flag or still not behind this feature flag for whatever the case is.
Would that be through the metadata that comes in the events, or do you actually decorate your feature flag code with spans? Or maybe situational.
Yeah, and so I think you just add your regular code with that says like this feature flag on or off.
Okay.
And so because it's you can add arbitrary fields, you can just give it a name that says feature flag XYZ.
Right. I was just curious if there was like cases where, I have a flag A and B, mm-hmm. and maybe I have in A I have a new span or something. Right, and does that impact kind of the ability of my observability system to consistently display, and compare spans?
It can be really useful with tracing if the code behind your feature flag is, for example, like a lot more complicated, but you would probably instrument it just the way you would want it instrumented without the feature flag
Okay.
to see like how it's going to behave normally. And then just, yeah, add the feature flag as a field.
So Dave asked a really interesting question about when we do these tests in production, sometimes they can implement or impact our data in our backends. And so what have you seen out in the field for techniques for people say, you know, we have a new route for writing to the through to the database for replacing the old one, maybe is inefficient or whatever. And we flip to the new one, but maybe it's writing data in a slightly different format, right? And so we've got to there are all these like side effects that can still happen and get out to production and cause us incidents, which is more work for me. And so what have you seen out there that people are doing to kind of to protect the data?
So some of the things that I've seen that have worked well is when you're differentiating test data and real production data is, so the first thing is your test users should have like some sort of Boolean or something in the backend that says like is test user, and that would be equal to true. So anything that this test user does in production, it's going to be marked with this Boolean set to true, and then in your wherever you collect your data, like Looker or, you know, what's the other one, Datadog, you can just say like, if you have any actions coming from this test user, put it somewhere else. Like, don't put it like in the same place as production, because in production, like it's everything that has is test user is false. And then same thing with all of the other test entities. If you have like a test cart and a test page or whatever your testing entities are, like each company is going to be a little bit different, then those should have some sort of flag in the back end for like is test object, and that should be set to true, and then everything that has that flag set should be put somewhere else in your dashboard.
I like that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing is, if you're testing on real production users, that's real production data, right? Like, it might be like an experiment, but every time you release a change, it's an experiment, right? Like every time you release a change, that changes something, and you can't possibly know. I mean, that's sort of the underlying theme here when we talk about testing in prod, is you're already testing in prod. You're just not being, you know, intentional about it. And so the difference here is if you have a subset of your traffic behind a feature flag, if you know that they're specifically like opted in as beta users, then like Talia said, you can mark them as beta users or test users. If you're dog fooding and you're limiting things to like your internal team, then those people should be marked as like, you know, your team's users and not like real
nefarious users, yes.
Yeah. And so if your business data reflects, like already thinks about this stuff, then it's probably not a lot of extra work to have, you know, be able to report on changes between these different groups.
So we've talked quite a bit about confidence and risk and kind of danger. I want to shift, since we're getting into our, you know, but we have about 10, 15 minutes before Q&A, and talk now about the opportunities in front of us with these new tools, right? Because I've been doing this for more than 20 years. Back when we started, we didn't have this stuff. You know, we had stones and chisels, and then, you know, and then we got Vim. And it was, you know, some people claim that it wasn't really a step forward. You know, we've come a long ways, and so we have these new capabilities, and they allow us to do new things. And since we were just talking about the data, let's talk a little bit about like what's possible about testing in production that we can't do in the synthetic lab environments, right? Because the data isn't real, and because we have things like GDPR that prevent us from doing that testing. So let's start with Shelby this time. Mm-hmm. If you could talk a little bit about the things you've seen out there where people are able to validate their code in a way that in production that just isn't possible anywhere else.
Yeah, I'll actually share another Honeycomb blog post from one of our users who used Honeycomb to debug an emergent failure in Redis. He actually monkey patched the Redis like Ruby library in order to observe what was going on, because there was all this like blocking, and they ended up with like all these connections, and Redis called them and said like, we're shutting you off, and it was this huge problem that without observability, without observability, he couldn't possibly debug it, and he could not reproduce it locally or in QA. It was just, you needed a certain amount of traffic in order to debug it. And the thing, like, I appreciate that there's industries and there's certain domains where you need to have a synthetic environment. Like if you're working on, you know, pacemakers or something, like that's really important. You want to be very, very confident in your tests. But there's also a cost to that, and similar to how we talk about, like, you know, 3 nines versus 4 nines is an order of magnitude more effort. It's similar with having like a test environment that actually like accurately enough represents production in order to give you any answers. And so being able to like reproduce like emergent failure modes in production is in a test environment is just, it's super expensive, and it's often not worth the infrastructure cost and the engineer brain cycles to actually be able to do that. And so I think that's where like a lot of the arguments against testing in prod fall apart, because you're going to have things that can only happen in prod. And so you may as well give yourself the tools to address them.
I like that.
I like couldn't agree more with you. Like you're preaching to the choir right now.
We need to start sending out hymnals for these things so we can all open them up. And
yeah, I used to be an automation engineer, so I would up until like the very end of that part of my career, I was only testing in staging because of the companies that I was working at didn't test in production until the last couple. But I would spend so much time testing features in staging, and they would be pushed to production, and then they would break in production, but they were working perfectly in staging. So what's the point of testing in staging if they're going to break in production? Like my users aren't going in and using the product in staging, so why do I care?
Mm-hmm.
And it took enough of that happening over and over again where I was like, okay, like there has to be another way to do this. And then I interviewed at a company that tested in production, and I haven't looked back.
And the thing about that too is it's that you as a tester are responsible for the quality of the code going out, and so it's super demoralizing when you have a certain level of confidence in staging, and then all of that falls apart in production. You end up, it's like, well, what were you even testing? It's like you were doing your job according to what was assigned to you, but you can't do your job according to like what's actually good for the business. And for people like us who care about the impact of the changes going out, like we want to be able to validate that. We want to be able to feel like this, you know, things are gonna work well. And so yeah, so I just I've talked to a few testers who are going into learning about observability and learning about the intersection between being a tester and observing code changes. And there's so much about testing that involves like the sense of responsibility and ownership over the services in production. And so it's like you don't have to be a developer to have an impact there. And so I just really appreciate your story there, because I feel you. I totally feel you on that.
I feel like there's an opportunity there, right, for testers that up until, well, it still goes on all over the place, right? Like a lot of shops still have dedicated testers doing old school QA, and but like what we want is to uplift those people so that they're doing more high value work, just like we try to do through all of our careers, and maybe the place for them to move towards is this idea of owning and nurturing the test spectrum. Right, but extending that from the line into production, but all the way out into production.
Right, and when you have like the right tools available, like when you when you have the right observability tools and you have the right feature flagging tools, and they're working together, and you can see the impact of your changes, and you can test them in production before they go out to your end users, like you're basically creating this bubble of like risk mitigation. So like if something goes wrong, like you're covered, like you can see the changes, you can see in Honeycomb, you can look at your logs and see what's going on before like your end users will be affected by them. So I just feel like you're doing it in the safest way possible with the right tools. Like, what else do you need? Like,
Well, you need me, right? So stuff still falls through,
yeah.
right? And maybe to kind of finish up the body of our conversation, you know, we've kind of gone from the beginning of the development cycle where we have you know, our unit tests and stuff, and we talked all the way through that out into production. But sometimes stuff slips through still. And having these tools in place still makes our life better. So right, I'm an incident commander, and I'm in there, and I'm asking questions, trying to bring an incident to resolution. And obviously now with say observability and feature control in place, we have additional tools for resolving that incident. So maybe we can talk about that for a second. Talia, have you seen, I'm sure you have seen cases where an incident is resolved quicker because of the agility that's enabled by feature flag service versus having to republish your code.
Yeah, and this just goes back to what Shelby was saying about like not being able to reproduce an issue in production. Like if there's an incident in production, like I'm not going to go to staging to test it. I'm going to go to production to figure out to reproduce the issue. And that's something that used to happen a lot when I was a QA engineer. There would be incidents and things being reported to us in production, and it's one of those like, oh, it's working on my machine type thing where like I did everything I could to test it, and it would be fine for me in staging, and then you would go to production, and you know these incidents would only be in production, and you're never going to know the differences between your staging environment and your production environment until you test in production.
I love the I feel like we talk about this in a Honeycomb in terms of like on-call, like approaching on-call in a healthy way, where if your on-call engineer gets paged at 2 in the morning and it turns out to be something where they can turn off a feature flag and then debug it in the morning when they've, you know, had enough sleep and a cup of coffee, like why aren't we doing this more?
Right.
You know, like on-call, it doesn't have to suck as much as we make it out to be. You know, it doesn't have to be this painful, either masochistic or like punishment type of thing. You know, we can put guardrails in place so that incidents get resolved and we stop impacting customers right away. And then we have the data, we have the observability to go back and actually resolve like what actually went wrong here, so that then you can go fix the code. But with a full night of sleep. Yeah.
I love that it has an impact on the health of our engineers, right? We're not stuck at 4 o'clock in the morning when we're at our lowest possible cognitive capacity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know about you two, but you know, you wake me up in the middle of an REM cycle and I'm a damn idiot. You know, for at least an hour before I'm like ready to do anything.
Yeah.
And I just really like the idea of like it also is a tool for reducing burnout and attrition even within our engineering teams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like that idea of having like different types of alerts. Like if something is broken, but it's not really affecting, it's not like a huge issue, like there should be different like severity levels for like the different types of alerts. Like you should only be woken up in the middle of the night to turn off a feature flag if, you know, it's your entire app is crashing and, you know, things are on fire.
Well, you know, with my SRE hat on, I'd say like we should only really be waking engineers up for things that are actually harming our customers.
Exactly.
If it isn't impacting the critical user journeys, then we probably should sleep through and come and hit it with, you know, with a full mind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of the work in SLOs comes out, where and error budgets, and Alex Hidalgo's new book, I recommend it to everybody. It's going to be awesome. The implementing service level objectives, I think you can order it now, is talks exactly about like, you know, how can we reduce alert fatigue and have more meaningful pages, and also be able to like anticipate like, okay, like things are affecting, you know, a tiny percentage of traffic right now, tiny percentage of users, but in 4 hours this is going to start impacting everybody. Like, should I wake somebody up to fix this, or can I wait till morning, sort of thing. And that's exactly how you do it. It involves some math behind the scenes, but when you have like good data about the health of your system, it's a lot easier to make, you know, to be able to alert on meaningful things, instead of just like CPU usage is high, or, you know, I've been on teams where we paged for like traffic isn't within the band that we expect it to be,
Yeah.
you know, and you shouldn't be waking somebody up for that if it's not going to impact your customer experience.
Yeah, I think of those as anxiety-driven alerts, right? Like they don't know that something is wrong. You're just maybe worried that something might be wrong, and so it's waking up and going, "Is the baby okay?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know, and it isn't great for anybody because
Mm-hmm.
you know, disturbed sleep patterns are bad for us.
Mm-hmm.
Shelby and I were talking on Twitter yesterday, and she said something really smart. She said like a lot of companies and a lot of people are making business decisions just based on hunches or just based on like an idea that they have, but they're not looking at data. And I think that's so important that like you write your test based on like actual data, and you make your business decisions based on data that comes from production. So, and using an observability tool like Honeycomb will allow you to do that. So,
right, and making it off of the in your risk assessment off of your SLOs as opposed to, you know, some fuzzy idea of like how many alerts are coming through or anything, like which nobody really has a clearer picture in any infrastructure of size.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool. That brings us to 52. We have one question, so we could probably come up with one of our own. Do either of you have questions that we could talk about? Since we're in the Q&A time and we have one in the queue. So I'll let you, go ahead, Shelby.
Oh, yeah, no, I always have questions about like cultural changes in a team. Like if you're watching this talk and you're like, oh man, like I get it. Like you know, there's some things we can't help with. The only way to test it is in prod. And you go to your manager and you're like, why aren't we doing this? And your manager's like, what are you talking about? You know, like how do you start moving the needle? How do you start like pushing for that cultural change on your teams and in your organizations?
So something I always like to tell people is to use examples from your past. Like if this is something that consistently happens where like you test something fully in staging and it works great and your automation tests are passing and then you push to production and it fails, like if that constantly happens, then maybe this is something that you should bring up. Like, can we get you know, a trial of these tools that we need to like make this work, just to see like if it works for us for a few weeks. And I would start with like examples from your past, because that if things consistently happen and you're not making changes to make them better, then they're going to keep happening. So that's where I would start.
Yeah.
I'd say most of my testing in production earlier in my career was done on the rule of it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Right? It would just be like, well, we don't really have a way to do this. I'm just going to do it, and I'm not going to ask anybody. I'm not recommending this for everyone unless you're really confident in your ability to get a new job. But we're often stuck in those places.
At my last job, my manager told me to take more risks because I would learn faster. And like I really appreciate that, because I'm very like I tend to be very hesitant. It's like, are you sure? Like, let me get, you know, 5 people to approve this before I do it, which is not, you know, the making of a good tester necessarily. But I was also like, I was on the DevOps team, I had access to all of our production systems, so I didn't want to just like make changes willy-nilly. And so him telling me, totally. And so him telling me like take more risks, you'll learn faster. And I was like it was so, I to this day, I like carry that with me. And it's still hard for me to just like get over that hurdle of you know, I'm like, I crave approval.
And confidence, right? Like that's usually what our leadership is looking for. Right. So what I coach people on pretty regularly is to think about what are the goals of our leaders that maybe we need to convince, and what their job is to give the business confidence in what we're doing. So whether if we're writing software, often the task is to say, this is the velocity I have to offer you, and this is my confidence in that velocity. Right. And then, you know, in operations, it's typically, this is the availability I can offer you, and this is the confidence I have in that. And we've started to move to more like encoded systems, like SLOs for that availability one. And then out in and we use it for feature flags and observability too, right? Like that's our metric we use to determine whether our estimates of confidence are meeting the actual wheels on the road.
Right.
So our question from Massimo is I'm thinking now about destructive tests in production, such as stress tests, security tests. Shall I avoid these kinds of tests in production? And do you have any experience with that? So let's start with stress tests, right? Like, do feature flags have a role in like, how do we integrate that with our stress testing regimen?
Yeah,
or even pen testing?
I think when you run these tests, these type of like security tests and stress tests in production, like I always get questions about this, and when I talk about this, I'm like, it's better to do this yourself at a time of like low traffic rather than like have your site crash in production because you didn't do these types of tests in production. So yes, you should be running performance tests and load tests and stress tests in production, but you should do it at a time of like low traffic and a time where you know that like if you run the test and the site crashes, you can bring it back up. So feature flags can play a role in that, but yes, they definitely should be done in production.
You could also do things like enable, if your stress testing has like a synthetic user it uses.
Yeah.
You could enable features just for the stress test, right?
Yep.
And then you can go back in your observability system and see the impact of the new code on your systems.
Exactly.
It brings me back to like chaos engineering and how if you're going to perform a chaos experiment, like you want to have confidence that your system will be resilient no matter when you deploy it. But at the same time, like you don't want to drop it on Black Friday. I mean, Black Friday kind of is a chaos experiment in itself, for example. But you want to be smart about when you start an experiment or you release a Chaos Monkey script. And it's the same thing with like if you want to start performing stress tests or security tests. If you have people like what's the term, like white hat or like security probe sort of people, what are they called?
Penetration testing.
Pen testers, yes. And so if you have those people behind the scenes, like you want to be confident that if they're starting to cause problems, that you can either block them off from the rest of the traffic, quarantine them, or ban them or whatever, that you have mitigation measures in place. And so the point of these tests is to have more confidence in your production environment. So absolutely, you should be doing these in production, but also you should have confidence in your production environment.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the standards around security, actually, the pen tests have to happen in production environment to really be valid. So, and it got me thinking about, I really like this idea of being able to enable new features just for the security team, to give them the opportunity to attack it while it's out in the real world, but before it's exposed to the wild hordes of bots and kitties and stuff.
Yeah, and I think the norm of this, like doing all this like testing and staging before, like I think, years ago there was no way to safely do it in production. There were these observability, like you said, Amy, these observability tools and feature flagging like didn't exist when, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. So now that there are these tools available, like those people who are still in tech from when these tools weren't available are still in that mindset of like, no, it's not possible. How is that, So
some of us grow out of it.
Yeah.
Massimo says, I saw pen testers hired for testing on a staging environment, and maybe it was because of a CISO that was afraid of testing in production, which is probably a thing, right? Like, hey, don't attack my production environment. I don't want you accidentally dropping my tables, which I guess is a statement about confidence. Again, I keep coming back to that.
It makes me think about like what's the purpose of running all these software systems that we're running? Like we're here to deliver business value, and testing in prod gives us more confidence in our systems and helps us learn more about our systems so that we can do a better job of delivering business value. And so when you refuse to like even acknowledge the possibility of testing in prod, that when you sort of like cover your eyes and cover your ears and stuff, it's like you're like makes me think of like the like trying to, you know, deliver packages on horses when you could deliver packages on trains or something. It's like you're gonna be stuck behind because you're just not learning about your systems, and you can't address the problems that are there. They're just gonna stay under the surface forever.
Well, and you brushed up against like an accessibility element there too, right? Which is, you know, you got old parts like me, and some of my peers, you know, that started around the time I did or earlier, that are looking at us and going, "You people, what are you doing? Testing in production? That is verboten," right?
Mm-hmm.
But we also have younger developers or new to tech people who now are empowered to do things that we would not have empowered a young developer to do 10 years ago.
Yeah. And you know what? There's always going to be those people who say testing in production will never work. What are you guys doing? Like these naysayers, I like to call them. Like, honestly, I don't care about those people. Like, if you
I just called them wrong.
yeah, if you're stuck in this mindset and you absolutely refuse to change your mindset, like, that's fine. You do you. I'll be over here testing in prod.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I think we've gotten to a pretty good point where we can tie up. If you do, either of you. Oh wait, I see. Oh, I thought I saw a new message. So, do you have any closing thoughts before we go on this whole deal, or it's okay to pass if you don't want to, and then we'll tie up and let everybody go back to get ready for lunch or whatever they're up to.
Shelby?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you're already testing in production, so add the tools to your tool belt so you can so you can get the most value out of those risks that you're already taking, because every time you push out a change, that is a test. So yeah, just like get the most out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also start with like Honeycomb has a free version and Split has a free version. I would go in and like download both of them, start using them, and figure out if the tools are right for you, if you like the process of testing in production, and again, like use examples from your past to bring this up to your management.
And push those tools to production to test them, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm trying. Maybe don't push your trial accounts to production. We might stop there. Get it.
Actually,
Well,
we
Honeycomb
encourage
actually has people doing that,
yeah,
don't you?
we do. We encourage people to send us their production traffic during their trials. So we also do paired trials. We will do proof of concept trials with people if you want to talk to our sales team. And if you have more questions about how to get started with observability, I hold office hours. I added the link in the chat. So yeah, grab a time on my calendar.
Yeah, and well, all three of us are in developer relations, so I'm pretty sure we're all happy, especially on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
We're all easy to find. And so with that, that's our time. Thank you, Talia and Shelby, so much for joining us today. I had a great time. I hope you did too. To our audience, thank you for joining us. And so that we can all have this time together in a time when we can't actually be together. And I'm so tired of it. Thank you. Stay safe out there, stay healthy, and stay resilient.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.